Hey, on this special day, let me tell you about a little-known thriller from 2003 called Identity. Enjoy your viewing pleasure and who eats appetite. The motion picture begins by listening to Dr. Malik's notes about the interrogation of brutal killer Malcolm Rivers, who once came to see him and asked for something stronger than aspirin. For at the time, the patient only complained that as a child his prostitute mother constantly locked her son in a motel while she herself was making out with men in bed, and at that time the doctor already knew that Malcolm had committed brutal murders in the motel. On May 10th, he killed 6 people, and that day was his birthday. At night, Harry's phone gets a call from his colleague who tells him that Rivers is being brought in for a retrial because of the discovery of his diary. On appeal it is confirmed that he was concealed intentionally, so the question of his sanity is reopened, and if he is found to be insane, tomorrow's execution by injection is reversed and he will simply be locked up in an asylum, after which the sequence of going back in time begins. Larry, the hotel manager, is approached by a man with a bloody girl in his arms, claiming that there has been an accident. Going back, the same man turns out to be a happy family man who had a flat tire on the road and a woman's slipper was the cause. Going back even further, Paris, Nevada's girlfriend driving a convertible decided to light a cigarette but couldn't find a lighter, and as it turned out a little earlier she was doing some very interesting things with a grown man and threw it in her bag, but while she was trying to open it behind the wheel, all her clothes and the same shoe that caused George to have to change a tire quickly flew out of her. At that time his wife was playing with her son, but when she stepped away from the car she was hit by a car. It turned out that the car was driven by actress Caroline Susan, whose cell phone died, and she asked the driver to find it in her bag, but because he was distracted, he accidentally hit the woman. Caroline asked him not to help them, but the driver disagreed and left the car. A little later, Caroline refused to give the phone and locked herself in the car, causing Edward to have to break the glass and retrieve it, but there was no connection, for Paris had accidentally hit the communications pole in her convertible. That's about how George got to this hotel with a request to make a phone call, but even the landlines are out of touch. So Edward decides to go get a 24-hour ambulance 30 miles away, but before he does, he kicks Caroline out with all her stuff, and she rents herself the best room 8 while Edward meets Paris on the road, whose car is out of order. When they arrive at a flooded stretch of road, their car stalls. But then a car with a guy named Lou and his girlfriend Nikki shows up. Lou doesn't accept Edward peacefully at first, but after some effort, he agrees to give them a ride. Only before that, Edward goes back to the car to get his gun. When they arrive, the motel manager treats the lady of easy virtue negatively, but ends up giving her a room for the night. George comes to see how Alice is feeling. She turns out to be in shock, and unfortunately she didn't bring a sewing kit tonight. Paris checks into room 7 and Ginny and Lou into room 6. Also in the middle of the night a new car pulls up at the motel. It turns out to be FBI agent Robert Maine, who is transporting a prisoner. Edward asks for help to call an ambulance for the woman, but again there is no connection. When Larry gives the agent number 10, Edward asks that after placing the prisoner in room 4 to give advice on how to help the woman. He himself at this time sews up her neck wound and wonders why the boy hasn't said a word, and it turns out that George is his stepfather, because his father left 2 years ago because of psychological problems. At the same time the boy watches the horrifying prisoner, who ends up being chained to the toilet and sent to watch Alice. Robert compliments Edward on his stitches, but while Paris is trying to get Cheetos out of the machine, she notices a policeman behind her, because it wasn't hard to guess from seeing the car with the insignia. The man offers to make her dinner at the diner, instead of cheese Cheetos for dinner. The girl tells him that her name is Paris. Robert wittily remarks that her name means Paris where he has never been before, but she parries that he is not going there tonight either. Meanwhile, Caroline is washing up for bed, but when she hears that her phone has caught the connection, she rather pulls down the bathroom curtain and heads outside to find a point with a better connection to call, but she ends up being attacked by someone, spilling her scarlet blood. In the middle of the night Edward hears a wicket creaking, and when he goes outside he finds the woman's bracelet, but finding the source of the noise, a strange knock is heard and it turns out to be the washing machine in the laundry room that washed Caroline's head. When Robert and Larry appear, the agent finds a room 10 key next to her head, and as it turns out, the culprit chained to the toilet has already managed to escape away. Meanwhile, in town, the judge argues with Rivers' lawyer, who is going to wait for his client, but the judge is furious, suggesting that the case be over so he can finally go home. The men gather everyone in the room and ask them to calm down, but Larry spills the beans that they have a killer walking around the motel, and it is also revealed that Edward is actually an ex-cop. The officers go on a search and Edward asks Paris to keep everyone calm and not let anyone out. At the gas station, Robert confesses that the prisoner is a serial killer and they decide to search the motel, knowingly splitting up. Things heat up. George tries to calm his son down, Larry sneaks into Caroline's room and Nikki freaks out, and while Lou follows her, it turns out that they got married 9 hours ago and she's pregnant. Larry kept looking for the money, but in Nikki and Lou's room, it's unfortunately discovered that Nikki lied about her pregnancy, because her friend saw him with another girl at the club and she immediately locked herself in the bathroom. Lou claims he hasn't been to that club in a year, while Edward finds a trailer with the girl's eyes and faces cut out of newspapers and of course a holster without a knife. Lou is pissed off that his wife won't let him in, but at one point he gets quiet and when Nikki opens the door he sees a shadow. So she locks herself in and jumps out the window. Robert discovers her, but when he enters the room, there is only Lou's mutilated body. But the killer himself runs away from the hotel through the gutters and sees the light of lanterns in the distance. When he breaks down the door and gets inside, he sees Edward and it turns out to be a diner, only he is attacked from behind by Robert and they end up tying him up. Ed sends Paris to watch the others and Larry to watch the killer as he is tied up and unconscious. Alice, on the other hand, finally wakes up and remembers nothing. While Paris goes to get something, Larry begins to panic trying to find the lock for his refrigerator, but the killer wakes up and wonders what he is hiding. In the room, Paris picks up her money and is startled by Edward. It becomes known that Edward is taking pictures of these places where 2 murders happened in an hour, but the girl also notices that he is a complicated type, finding out that he is a Taurus, just like her. While he was photographing Lou's body, he also talked about leaving the police for health reasons, for he was exhausted. The last case was a young pregnant Mexican woman who was infected with AIDS. Then he was instructed what to say to her, but in 1 second she saw that he was hesitant, so she spread her arms and jumped. After that he began to feel bad and took a vacation, but he also noticed that Lou was holding the key to number 9, which was starting to feel like a countdown. Only at number 9 was Robert standing and they noticed Larry, who had left the killer, but after checking him out, Robert sees a horrifying picture of where else he finds the key to number 8 and now all suspicion falls on Larry, so he grabs Paris, but the girl couldn't stand it and pushed him into the kitchen. But while going up she accidentally opened the refrigerator from where the body of an unknown man fell out, and Larry as if dissolved. However, on the street they notice that he is about to leave, but George notices that his son is standing in his way, but Larry dodges and knocks his father down. The cops are shocked with such a pattern of events. You can judge by yourself because it takes a lot of effort for that to happen. At this time the lawyer assures the judge to look at Malcolm's diary, because all the records are made as if by different people, which means that Malcolm suffered from a mental disorder and could not realize his crimes, so he cannot be sentenced to death. But a policeman walks in and says Malcolm is already here. Larry is tied up and he tells how he got here. A few days ago he was driving from Las Vegas where he lost all his money. He was running out of gas, so he stopped here and found the owner of the motel, who was also named Larry, only he was lying face down in a plate. It was supposed to be a stroke. Then a parts dealer drove up and gave him $30 and then Larry hid the owner's body to make some money, but he swore he didn't kill anyone. Paris almost lost her life, but decided to believe his story, but Robert didn't want to believe it. And Nikki told the story from the brochure about the cemetery where this motel was built, because an entire Native American population had been slaughtered there. When Robert hears this, he freaks out and threatens everyone with a gun and asks everyone to stay in this room until dawn. Nikki starts talking about a show in which 10 people got to the island and died one by one, only it turns out that they were all connected. So the company decides to share who was going where, and Larry ends up being born near the town of Paris, who by the way was going home to buy a plantation of orange trees. Robert heard a grinding sound in Alice's room and as he approached her, he realized that she was dead. Edward reassured himself that she had died of an accident, but under the bed they found the key to room 6. Only the missing key to room 7 is in the pocket of the now deceased George. Edward is about to let Nikki and Timmy go for a ride until dawn, but while Robert tries to stop them, they get in the car and there's an explosion. And then the strangest thing began. After they put the car out, there were no bodies. They also noticed that George, the serial killer, the actress and eventually Alice were missing. Paris gets hysterical, but says it's her birthday next week, May 10th. And surprisingly, Larry, Robert and Edward have their birthdays on the same day. They check the copies of the documents of those already dead and all have birthdays on May 10th. Immediately lightning strikes the roof of the building and the lights go out. Robert goes to the switchboard, and Edward finds copies of people with the same names and birthdays. He begins to rave and in 1 second finds himself in an office next to Dr. Malik, who wonders why he didn't come in for his last session. Edward tells him that he was probably passed out again after the incident with the Mexican woman who jumped off the roof, but Malik shows him a picture of Malcolm Rivers, who Edward doesn't recognize, but he is told that 4 years ago he was convicted of the brutal murder of 6 people. The only snag is that Malcolm is his identity, for when Edward looks in the mirror he sees Malcolm. Malik asks him to calm down, because Malcolm has already gotten rid of several of his personalities, because all those people in the hotel that he talks about, they are all in his head. All he has to do is leave Edward behind to prove to the judge that the killer's identity no longer exists so that he won't be executed. He finds himself not far from the motel where Robert is trying to figure out the panel while Paris breaks into his car and finds Robert in the prisoner's file in the glove compartment. We are shown that they were two prisoners, but Robert killed the policeman in the car and changed his clothes. Paris found the body of the real cop in the trunk of the car. Just as Robert appeared and demanded the keys to the truck, he was immediately hit from behind by Larry. But when he tries to retrieve his weapon, he is shot several times in the chest, and Paris runs away and meets Edward, who stops her and asks her to wait. Edward and Robert meet in a shootout in which Edward is wounded and Robert is killed. Paris tries to get Edward up, but he says that he saw Paris in the orange grove. We are then shown Malcolm repeating the same words and Paris leaving the motel at dawn. The doctor and the lawyer show the judge that 9 out of 10 personalities have been destroyed, leaving the last in the form of Paris, who was peaceful, which is why Malcolm needs a doctor, not the death penalty. So they send him to a mental hospital under Malik's care. Rivers was driving along happy and humming the song that Paris's personality sang, following her orange orchard, but at the treehouse she finds the key to the first room, as immediately a boy Timmy appears who has actually destroyed all those poor personalities without leaving any regret for them. And when Malik suspects something, he opens the door and Timmy stabs Paris with the words "sluts can't start a new life," whereupon Rivers takes it upon himself to strangle Malik and the car pulls over to the curb. Subscribe to the channel and like the video if you like it. Good luck.